Hello, everyone. My name is Peñalosa, and this is Cities for Everyone, the webinar. Originally, I'm from Bogota, Colombia, where I led the construction of over 200 parks and also expanding a small program of open streets and turning it into the world's largest pop-up park, where every Sunday over 1 million people come out to walk and bike and skate and chat and socialize. But over the last 25 years, I've been living in Toronto, Canada, where I created the nonprofit 880 Cities. And I've been fortunate to have worked in over 350 cities around the world. As a way of giving back, I created this bi-weekly webinar. Always interesting, always free. And today our guest is my brother, Enrique. He was mayor of Bogota twice. He's an urban thinker. He wrote a book on equality in the city, which is out in English this week. And this is his first talk based on this new book. I hope you enjoy it. Enrique, welcome.
Okay, thank you, Guillermo. I don't have time. We have already gone 10 minutes, so I will rush. I have been mayor of Bogota on 2 occasions, in 98 and in 2016 until 2019. And I have worked in many places all around the world. More recently, I have been doing some work in Africa, but let's go quickly. What I will talk about is not just what the book is about. The book has many other themes, but basically, the main thesis is that equality is important for a city. Equality makes a better city, and a good city constructs equality. More than designing cities, we are designing a way of life, because a city is a means to a way of life. So when we are talking about cities, it's not about urban experts, but what we really have to know is, how do we want to live? What kind of life do we want to live to be happier? Cities are more important than ever because, for one thing, households are ever smaller all over the world. So and this means that our friends, our family, and our home is our city. We have progressively also more leisure time. And so we are less at work, less at home, and more in public spaces, more in our city, more in all kinds of activities. 100 years ago, we could have lived in an isolated beach because families were very large. My parents' generation was 10 brothers each, so each person had 200 cousins. And even if there were only 5 people per home, per household, that's 100 cousins. But now people have a couple of children, so people have 4 cousins. It's less interesting to live in an isolated beach. People normally tend to want to be closer to other people and to larger society. More and more, our friends are our family. Before families, family life was very large. People used to marry very much between cousins. But more and more, our friends are our family, and our city is our home. We spend much more time awake outside than inside it. However, most people have more clear how they want their home than how they want their city. An epochal revolution has recently occurred, which is revolutionizing everything for cities. People can increasingly work from anywhere. People can choose where to work. So cities are going to change in nature very much because of this. And cities are going to have to compete very much for people, because people can progressively live more and more anywhere they want. However, I propose that few people will work from an isolated cabin in the woods. People like to go to cafes to work, even if they have an apartment, because they like to be with people. We like to be with people. And in the city, we find people who share our interests, regardless of what they are, how specialized they are, Afghan literature or rocketry or whatever. So people like to be in cities where they find people with shared interests. People went to cities to work. During the Industrial Revolution, for 200 years in England, the death rates were much higher in urban areas than in rural areas. But cities grew because people need to go to work in cities. But now it's more for fun. Because, for example, it's very interesting how in New York, for example, the recovery in subway use has been much more in weekends when people go for leisure than during work time. People go less to work to the city. They stay at home more and more, but they continue to go to cities to work. There is another contemporary revolution. There is a new lease on life for small cities and towns. The biggest problem for small cities for the last 200 years and for towns is that they lost the brightest young people, the most adventurous and risk takers. They went to the larger cities because there were no opportunities in the small cities. Now there is a new possibility to live in a small city because you can work from there. And some people like small cities, even though they have less privacy, but they have more community. This is closer to go to the countryside, for example. So it's a revolution because only 20 years ago, small cities, or even 10 years ago, small cities were dying. 5 years ago, small cities were dying. This is an epochal change that is changing the world forever. And there is a possibility that many more people will choose to work in smaller cities. Smaller households also means smaller homes. More and more people who like to live in dense cities live even in 30 square meter homes. So people go to home to sleep, but they go to work in the cafe or they go to eat outside. More and more people eat out more. So more and more our cities are home and largely determines our happiness. The question now is equality? Now we have a world in which we have adopted private property. Communism failed. So the whole world has adopted private property and the market as the best way to manage most of society's resources. So the market needs inequality. Some companies to succeed, others to fail. So can we forget about equality? I don't think so. Millions, hundreds of millions have died for equality in revolutions all over the last 200 years. So I will propose that equality is still an issue. I propose that inequality is probably the greatest obstacle to making a good city. Every time we want to, rich people don't want to share their park with lower income people. They don't want, they don't want lower income people, higher income people want to isolate themselves in gated communities, in country clubs, rather than parks. People don't want to give space to bicycles or to exclusive lanes to buses. So also a good share that fosters equality and thus happiness, and feeling inferior is an obstacle to happiness. So a good city makes everybody not feel inferior or excluded. Probably more important than income equality is the equality that cities can create. What kind of equality can a good city create? A good city achieves that nobody should feel inferior and excluded. Kinds of equality that a good city constructs, for example, meeting as equals of citizens of different incomes. This, of course, in public space, rich and poor people always meet. The owner of a luxury apartment meets the doorman. But what is interesting is that if they meet in public space, they meet in a different way because they don't meet separated by hierarchies. One is not the owner of the apartment, and the other is the doorman. They are equals in the park or in the sidewalk or in public transport. In a good city, people, rich and poor, meet as equals in many places. Also, a good city promotes equality of quality of life, access to green, to sports facilities, without being a member of a country club or being an owner home, to music lessons. That's what a good city is called. Democratic equality. Democratic equality means that if all citizens are equal, as constitutions state, then, for example, a bus with 100 passengers has a right to 100 times more space than a car with one, or that public good prevails over private interest. This means that even you may forcefully buy land to do a park or a school or a road. People meet as equals in a good city. Inequality, I would say, is mostly felt during leisure time, because during sleep is not much felt. During work, even the president of the company or the lowest paid employee, they have problems and they have friends and they have good and bad things. But when they're going to their leisure times, when the upper income person goes to a large, pleasant home and has access to restaurants, to vacations, and the low income person has a small home, and probably besides television and the phone or the computer, the only leisure alternative they have is public pedestrian space. So the least of the least that a quality democratic city has to have is quality pedestrian space. Quality public pedestrian space is important to all. No leisure time alternatives, it is crucial. So we made, for example, in our even informal neighborhoods, hundreds of parks to try to make life better for lower income people. Because something that I will say to here is that I have talked about I have given many battles to create things that improve people's lives. And it has been very difficult. It's not just talking at a university, but having very difficult fights. We created parks in low-income areas with sports facilities, and it's very scarce. It's very difficult to get land, but this is another story. For example, we created some great leisure time centers, culture and sports centers with swimming pools, gyms, music rooms, dance rooms. Now, for example, if we have democracy, we should, I would say in most cities in the world, country clubs with golf clubs have tax exemptions, which is crazy. Those golf clubs should become public parks. And I show you here, for example, this is in Nairobi. I hear there are some people from Nairobi. This is Kibera. I'm good friends with Governor Sakaya Johnson in Nairobi, for example. But for example, and next to Kibera, there is a golf course. Clearly, Kibera is one of the most dense slums in the world. This should become a public park to make the life of tens of thousands of children in Kibera happier. This is not communism, this is democracy. Here in Bogota, for example, I turned this, the most exclusive country club in the country, we turned the polo fields and the riding areas into a public park. Now, out of the whole universe, public pedestrian space is the only space to which we have access. I mean, we see planet Earth, but and we see like we share the spaceship Earth, but when we come down, we can only be in our country. We can only allow, for example, just my wife was not given the Canadian visa. We could not go to Canada because Canada did not allow us to go for vacation. So we cannot share the world. And even in our country, we don't have access because it's private property. And in our city, if we try to go into private property, we may get killed. And if we go into the street, we get killed by cars. So all of this long story just to say that the only microscopic place to which we have access in the world is public in our city. Public pedestrian space is very important for equality. I would say that what is most important about a building is what happens when it reaches the ground. That's what buildings should be judged on before anything else. When a building is made or anything else in a city, does it improve its surroundings? Is it more pleasant to be there, to play there, to talk there? That's how we should judge buildings? How much do they improve this space around them? And moreover, we discuss much about heights and size of houses, but more important is how much quality public pedestrian space is there around housing. I had a huge fight against cars on sidewalks. When I was first mayor, there was practically no sidewalks in Colombia. I was almost impeached for getting cars off the sidewalk. This is the way it was. For example, it was very difficult. A war. I began to get my first white hairs during these battles, and then we created sidewalks. And if anybody, the main difference between an advanced city and a backward city is not that they have subways or highways, is that they have quality sidewalks. One characteristic of backward cities is lack of good sidewalks. And of course, if you think it's easy to do good sidewalks, try it. It's the most difficult thing in the planet to get cars off, to give space to pedestrians anywhere. It's the most difficult war. Now, we created this kind of sidewalks. Now, of course, this is much to do in Bogota. It's not that all sidewalks in Bogota are like that. Public pedestrian space is magic. I mean, anything we buy in the store loses very quickly its capacity to provide joy. But public pedestrian space is the most magical good in the planet. It's perhaps the only good that does not diminish its capacity to yield, to provide happiness. A good city has many spaces in which citizens of all income levels meet as equals. In a good city, there should be no near a park does not increase much the value of a home. If being near a park increases very much the value of a home, it's because there are not enough parks in a city. Now, waterfronts are crucial because waterfronts can provide so much joy. Rich and poor go to waterfronts if they have quality pedestrian infrastructure. But even in London, for example, in the picture where there are so many fantastic parks, people love to go to the waterfront. Now, or in New York, now urban environmentalists, now they come to tell us that we should leave our waterfronts in the wild, in green, that they must be natural. So it makes it impossible for people to use it massively, but now it's the cool thing. I would say that nothing about urban waterfronts has been natural for centuries. And also, the part of urban waterfronts is insignificant next to all the waterfronts in a country. In Colombia, for example, urban waterfront may be 1,000 of all waterfronts in the country. Now, it is wonderful that a city should have trees and birds, whatever is done in creating a city should prioritize human happiness. That may require that we have more hard surfaces or less. We should have more trees or less when we design a park, more sports fields or more grassy meadows. But whatever we do as human habitat, we should prioritize human happiness. And mobility, I will now change in the issue, is very peculiar. I will talk about mobility because it's a very peculiar issue. Mobility is very peculiar because it's very counterintuitive. It does not necessarily improve with economic development. Bigger roads do not solve traffic. And mass transit does not solve traffic jams, even though people think they do. Mass transit solves mobility, but not traffic jams. The only way to solve traffic jams is restricting car use. For example, restricting parking, but that's another issue. Now, mobility is counterintuitive because of many other reasons. For example, non-rail mass transit may be more appropriate than rail as a solution. Mass transit solves mobility, I repeat, but not traffic jams. Here, for example, you have Shanghai, has a lot of subway, has a lot of traffic jams. Or some cities with metros have some of the biggest traffic jams in the world, like Bangkok or Mexico. Also, Now, rail is sexy. Now, at this time, everybody wants trams. They're very cool. It was the opposite in 1940. All cities had trams, but people thought trams were for the poor. They were backward, and buses were sexy when they appeared in the late 30s. Now, the opposite. We have to be very careful to do what is right and not what is in vogue, what is cool at a given moment. For efficient and sustainable mobility, the most important thing, of course, is density. In a dense city, bicycles work well, buses, subways, everything works well that is sustainable. This is Bogota, the wealthy areas. I will show you later the poor areas. In a low-density city, no mobility that is sustainable works well. In the kind of low-density suburbs, nothing works well. Now, no large city has ever enough resources to solve its mobility needs with rail. Maybe Tokyo or something, but even then, London moves, for example, 50%. London, which has a huge subway network, moves 50% more people by bus than by metro. Londoners use buses because it's too expensive to build metro lines everywhere, and also because they prefer the surface option with views of the city, natural light. The solution to the mobility challenge, equity and political than of financial resources or engineering. What makes mass transit is not metal wheels, but exclusive right-of-way. This is the system we created in Bogota, the Transmilenio bus system, which has only 114 kilometers and moves 2.5 million people every day. And it's been increased by 60% at this moment. BRT is a democratic distribution of road space. It has to do with equality. Sometimes they told me, oh, they tell you, this road is too narrow. We cannot put BRT there. So we said, yeah, it is too narrow, so we cannot have cars there. So for example, in this case, we took cars out. We made only pedestrian and bus only road downtown Bogota. Now, we were inspired by the Curitiba system in Brazil made by a wonderful mayor, but Transmilenio was much improved version with much higher speed and much higher capacity. It became a model to hundreds of cities all over the world. This is the Transmilenio in operation in Bogota. It's important to see the overpass. The overpass increases very much speed for express lines and increases capacity very much as well. Now, in our experience, metro investment costs per mile are between 7 and 18 times higher than those for bus-based mass transit. While the operational cost per passenger, for example, of the New York Metro or the European Metro is around between $5 and $7 per passenger, Transmilenio is around 75 cents of a dollar. Even if several subway lines are built, which is wonderful, metros are wonderful in most cities, majority of public transport users will use buses, not metros. So if there is going to be buses anyway, the question is, which is the best way to operate buses? BRT is only a name. It's only a name. And we were innovators in giving names to this system. BRT is only a name for the best way to operate buses because of the following. With BRT, buses achieve the highest speed. With BRT, buses achieve the highest capacity. With BRT, buses achieve the lowest energy consumption. With BRT, buses achieve the lowest cost per passenger. With BRTs, buses achieve they need the least amount of buses. And with BRT, it frees the most amount of road space for cars and other vehicles. So that's why BRT is interesting. For example, Delhi Metro moves 1,300 passengers per kilometer. Transmilenio moves 20,000 passengers per kilometer. I want for example, in passengers hour direction, Transmilenio moves more passengers hour direction than most subways in the world, than all subways in Europe, for example. So many times people say, oh, BRT has very low capacity. Of course, a high capacity metro has more capacity than a BRT. But most subways don't achieve those capacities. So, in fact, Transmilenio is moving more passengers than most metros in the world. In a road with frequent traffic lights, a BRT can do around 16 miles per hour operational speed versus around 22 miles per hour for a metro with frequent stops. New York, for example, has an average speed of commercial speed of 17 miles per hour. This is, again, a Transmilenio operation. Now, but what is important is not the speed. This is very important, reached by a bus, but how much does the trip, door-to-door trip, take? What is travel time from origin to destination? And that is largely determined by how far transit is from the origin and destination of trips. So again, I repeat, the important thing is not how fast the train goes, but how much time the trip takes. For mass to be near the origin and destination of trips, it must be low cost, because if not, you cannot have trains going near everybody's home. For example, this is an image. If we had invested, the black image, including the red line, is what we have now as Transmilenio network in operation. As I said, there is 60% increase on the construction. If we had invested all the money in Metro, we would have only been able to do the red part. So we can choose between the red line or the whole network that you can see there. If we do BRT, simply the cost is much lower. And so you can go much closer to all the origin and destination of trips. And so it makes trip times less long. BRT can make travel time shorter because it can be boarded closer and alighted closer to the origin and destination of trips. BRT can make travel time shorter because it can change lines without passengers having to alight, to go and walk and wait for another vehicle. BRT can make travel shorter because it can have higher frequencies in low-density environments, such as most of those in Canada or the United States. You cannot have a subway because it's very big. A train has 1,400 passengers. It cannot go every 5 minutes or so because it would go empty. But if buses are much smaller, you can have a much higher frequency. So you have much less time waiting at the station. BRT can make travel shorter because buses can leave the line, the trunkway, and using right doors, they can go in ordinary streets and collect passengers. BRT is a powerful symbol of democracy and equality because as BRT zooms by a luxury car stuck in traffic, it makes a much more visible symbol that public good prevails over private interest. When the very expensive cars is stuck in traffic and the bus zooms by, a child can go like this to the sun. This is democracy at work. Now, we also made a subway. I contracted as a mayor the first subway line in Bogota. Subways are fantastic, wonderful, I love them, but simply it's expensive. And BRT is not necessarily inferior. It's not necessarily just because it's cheaper. It has many advantages. Now, bicyclists and transit users are social heroes. Why should we put transit users underground? So we should have BRT everywhere, even if we have underground metro. The principle sustaining bikeways and sidewalks is also equality. All citizens have a right to use the same amount of road space, regardless of the vehicle. A pedestrian has a right to the same amount of road space as somebody in a Rolls Royce. Giving priority to equality led us to create a protected bicycle network many years before Paris or New York. In 1999, when there was only bikeways in the Netherlands and Denmark, we created a network more than 250 kilometers long. Bogota today has about 800 kilometers network of protected bikeways. A protected bikeway is a symbol also that not only protects cyclists, but it's a symbol that a citizen on a $30 bicycle is equally important to one on a $50,000 car. It increases the social status of the cyclist to have a protected bikeway. Today, more than 10% of trips in our 8 million inhabitant city are made by bicycle. There are more than 1 million daily bicycle trips in Bogota today, even though we have a lot of rain. This is some of the network of bicycles in Bogota. We made, for example, in 1999, this bicycle highway, when in the border of the city, where the city was expanding. And it's a luxury bikeway because it's about 15 meters wide and it has underground cables and that through some neighborhoods which were even slums, very poor areas where the city was going to grow also. This is what we made at first. This picture I am very proud of because it's very interesting. You have a luxury infrastructure in some very poor neighborhood for pedestrian, for bicycles, and the car in the mud. You can see is a symbol, unconscious symbol, creating equality. We don't have money to do both. I would love to put the pavement for the car, which we did later. Now, this is it. After the city grew around the pedestrian highway, the bicycle highway, today we have more than 120-kilometer bicycle highways in our very dense city, like this one. Now, every change in the issue, the great challenge for the world, because it's not just for Africa. Every 4 years, sub-Saharan Africa urban population increases by 84 million. Every 16 years in Africa, well, by the way, 84 million is more than the total population of countries like Britain, France, Germany, South Korea, Canada, or Australia. And that's what every 4 years, the urban population of sub-Saharan Africa increases. I remember, every 4 years, the population of sub-Saharan Africa increases more than the total population of Germany. Every 16 years, it is necessary to build housing, schools, roads, hospitals, public transport for a population equivalent to that of the United States. Imagine roads, water supply that the United States has, and it has to be built every 16 years in Africa. Less than 5% of what African cities will be in 70 years has been built. Most sub-Saharan African cities will multiply between 10 and 20 times over the next 60 years. The new areas of African city to be built could have superior designs, could be different cities, better than all cities in the world, because they have not been yet created. Now, in the transition from 31% urban to today 82% urban, Colombia's main cities population multiplied more than 20 times. This is what's going to be happening in most African, sub-Saharan African countries. And they have slums. These are our slums in Bogota where we had them. Now they have been very much improved, but this is what Africa has. When I became mayor of Bogota for the first time in 1998, around 50% of the city was made of settlements that had been informal or were still informal. The problem with that is have the wrong location, insufficient public spaces, many lack water, sewage, pavement, legalization, property titles, water supply, sewage, housing. All of the legalized neighborhoods in Bogota since 1954, of all the legalized, a third, about 5 times more than the next major. This was, you see this, the informal neighborhood, the blue tile roof. These are fantastic schools, for example, that we built. We built schools, parks, even community centers. But the idea is not just to improve slums, but to avoid them towards the future. The most important objective of African cities should be to avoid slums. Today, there are 300 million African urban population who live in informal settlements or smalls. 500 million more people could live in slums over the next 50 years if nothing is done. Slums not only cause suffering today, they create a city that grows in the wrong place. Mobility will suffer. A city without public space for roads, parks, public buildings. There is only one reason why slums exist: lack of access of the poor to well-located legal land. Governments cannot provide computers, refrigerators, motorcycles, but they could provide well-located land. People know how to build their own homes if they have the land in the right places. Private property and the market case of land around growing cities. Private property and the market is beautiful for tomatoes. If the price goes up, supply increases and tomato prices go down. But in the case of land around growing cities, we can increase the price all we want, and the supply of land accessible to water supply, to transport, to work is not going to increase. So there is no justification for land around growing cities to be private, to be in the market, as if it was tomatoes. In my 2 terms, we did housing projects for more than 500,000 people through land intervention. Projects such as this, in some cases, we just build 1 or 2 floors and people build 2 or 3 floors more above. This is another project in Render that is under construction now. If at least land is saved for roads and wonderful parks, African cities in the not far future can be better than those anywhere in the world. This is Central Park in New York, which was done in 1860, when New York was smaller than many African cities and not much richer. So this is the kind of things that could be done and even much better in African cities today, if we save land for these things. And one advantage in Africa is that much land is not private. Why not, for example, a city crisscrossed in all directions by hundreds of greenways? This is what they could do in Africa. 1 greenway for every car street, for example. Now, at any income level, a city can make us happier. That is what I know you all are here for, and I think we are going to be doing it better all the time. Thank you.
A call to action on that pedestrian space. Can you remind why is it that pedestrian space, not only in emerging countries, but also in the countries that are so-called developed?
Well, clearly, as I mentioned in my whole issue is that equity is very important, equality or equity or whatever you want to call it. As I mentioned that public pedestrian space is extremely important because in a great city, people meet in many places as equals. So it's not so important if somebody is a billionaire. In Sweden, for example, there are some societies where people are more equal. And for example, the owners of IKEA or Spotify or things like this, the billionaires, they take the subway, they take the bus, they ride the bicycle, they go to the neighborhood cafe. You don't have to be in these extravagant yachts and private jets and things that are they harm the legitimacy of social organization. So more and more, I think we have to do public pedestrian space that is beautiful, with flowers, with gardens, with safe spaces for children. What makes the difference between the great city and one that is not is, above all, public pedestrian space. And of course, these things, it's very clear that not only has to be wide sidewalks, but they can be beautiful, and they have to be close to places where you go to buy, to a bakery, to a shop, this is, and of course, each parks, and they have to be designed according to each society, because some places that are very hot, for example, they need many trees, and in other, they need less trees to make use of the diffuse rays of sunlight that come in. Public pedestrian spaces is a very magical thing. Is something that does not diminish its capacity to provide joy. Thinking about this, we learn, for example, that satisfaction is not the country of dissatisfaction. For example, if I open the water spigot and no water comes out, it gives me a lot of dissatisfaction. But if I open it and water comes out, it doesn't give me any satisfaction. So it happens with roads, for example. If roads have potholes, it gives me a lot of dissatisfaction. But if the road is fine, it doesn't. But instead, public pedestrian space, and this is an advice to people in government, it always provides satisfaction and it never diminishes. But we have to continue to improve more and more and more and more our public pedestrian spaces. For example, why should we have curbside parking? Why should we have curbside parking? I mean, if we just get rid of curbside parking and make sidewalks wider and nicer with more garden, with more green, safer for children, this is just a little battle that can be given everywhere. But for example, curbside parking should in the future disappear. This is too valuable a space to give to park cars. But anyway, many of these discussions are interesting for the future.
Thank you very, very much, Enrique, and thank you very much to the hundreds of people from all over.
Thank you very much to you and to all the people who were here. You're very generous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Enrique, for what a wonderful presentation when you made it so clear about the role of the pedestrians. People, we walk, we are pedestrians, and how this is so critical, the sidewalks, for happiness and for health and for developing a sense of belonging and for equity. Also, how cities should be built in the best possible places, not in the leftover land, but in the best possible places where these developed cities that are growing or emerging cities that are being created anew, but in best possible places, and the role of public transit and the role that BRTs can play, how we need citywide transit systems. I mean, there are so many teachings. I hope everybody who watches this video will share it with decision makers in the public or private or NGO sectors, with the media, with friends and universities, with students. Thank you, Enrique, and thank you, every one of the hundreds of people from all around the world that are watching today. And I'll see you in 2 weeks on Cities for Everyone, the webinar. Thank you.